everyone. We'll get started in about 20 or 30 seconds. It's lovely to see you all. Set up the chat so y'all can introduce yourselves. All right, the chat should be active. So for our attendees, if y'all want to introduce yourselves and say hi and use maybe what organization you're from, why you're here, and maybe what you're excited to learn about. And then I'll share my screen and I'll get us started. Okay, can everyone see that yet? Let's see. See anything?
It's coming, James. There it is.
Okay, great. So welcome on this beautiful, it's sort of beautiful where I'm at. I'm based out of New Orleans. My name is James Husband. My pronouns are he, him. I work for the Louisiana Campaign for Tobacco-Free Living as a health equity coordinator. So I work to bring equity to our programs and processes. And today we're going to share with you these three brilliant students who have done a lot of work to help introduce and teach us about the smoking and the effects on the hearing and balance system. Our Empowering People in Community series works to bring information via webinar and in-person communication and education sessions. We work to equitably bring health education, resources, and hope to people, populations, and communities in Louisiana. So welcome again. And I'm going to give it to Dr. Majwa to introduce our panelists today and give a little bit of background about the program they do.
Good morning. Thank you, James, and thank you guys for having us. My name is Dr. Megan Majaway. I'm a clinical assistant professor at LSU Health Sciences Center in the Department of Audiology. I've had the pleasure of teaching these three young women over the past 3 years and watching them grow into the awesome audiologists they are becoming. As part of their third-year curriculum, they are required to do a research project, and this research project was not only very, very informative for all of us. We are so happy to have the opportunity to take what they've learned and the information that they've gathered and share it with you all. So we're excited to be here. You'll learn that there is a optional survey involved in this, and we hope you will agree to participate. And thank you for being here. I will pass it on to Kelly Anders.
Good morning and welcome to our presentation on smoking and the effects on the hearing and balance system. I'm Kelly, and Corsi and Andy are my counterparts. So just some quick facts on smoking. About 34 million US adults smoke cigarettes, and 20% of adults in Louisiana are smoking cigarettes. 235 young people begin smoking cigarettes daily, and smoking leads to disease and disability and harms nearly every organ of the body. As mentioned by Dr. Majaway, we are participating or running a survey. If you are interested, this is completely voluntary and anonymous. We're trying to gauge participant knowledge and awareness of the effects of smoking on the hearing and balance systems and explore the effectiveness of the presentation. Again, this is completely voluntary and anonymous. There's a survey at the beginning of this presentation, and then another one will be, another QR code will be given at the end. It takes less than 5 minutes. So if you're interested, please feel free to scan that QR code now. Give everyone a minute if you're interested. while anyone is filling that out, we're just going to go over some brief topics and the agenda of today's presentation. So the presentation is going to be split into three main topics, being hearing loss that I will discuss, tinnitus brought to you by Corsi, and then balance with Andy. The goals of this presentation in the hearing section will be developing an understanding of the auditory system and hearing loss, investigating the relationship between smoking and hearing loss, and exploring ways to manage hearing loss related to smoking.
We will be discussing tinnitus. We're going to develop an understanding of what tinnitus is and possible risk factors for it. We're going to discuss the relationship between smoking and tinnitus and some populations that are at risk, and then consider the correlation between tinnitus and urine cottoning levels.
With balance, we're going to develop an understanding of the vestibular system, explore the relationship between smoking and balance. That includes current smoking, past smoking, and secondhand smoking. And lastly, discuss other factors that affect an individual's independence.
So in order to understand the implications of smoking, it's important to have a basic understanding of the auditory system. So the human ear is divided into three parts: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. So how do we hear? Sound is transmitted through the air as sound waves from the environment, like my voice, and these sound waves are gathered by the outer ear and sent down the ear canal to the eardrum. Sound waves cause the eardrum to vibrate, which sets three tiny bones in the middle ear into motion. The motion of these three bones causes fluid in your inner ear or your cochlea to move. The fluid motion in this inner ear causes tiny hair cells to bend and send nerve signals to your brain that we recognize as different sounds. Hearing loss. So that's how we hear. So what's hearing loss? Hearing loss is an important issue in public health, having rising prevalence and a negative impact on social function, mental, and physical health. Hearing loss happens when something affects your auditory system, and there's three types of hearing loss, being conductive, sensorineural, and mixed. We'll discuss those in a little bit more detail. Risk factors: a variety of things can cause or contribute to hearing loss, such as age, genetics, ototoxicity, noise exposure, head trauma. Hearing loss can affect your ability to work, communicate with others, and generally enjoy life. Having hearing loss can make you feel disconnected from the world around you, and you may become frustrated, irritable, or angry. So as mentioned, there are three types of hearing loss. We're going to be discussing two types in a bit more detail. The first type being conductive hearing loss. Conductive hearing loss happens when sound cannot get through the outer or the middle ear. So consider it an obstruction or injury to these parts of the ear. In the outer ear, earwax or foreign objects may obstruct the ear canal, limiting sound from traveling down the ear canal to the eardrum. And additionally, instances of eardrum injury or chronic ear infections can result in conductive hearing losses. A conductive hearing loss can be mimicked by simply plugging your ears. When you plug your ears, you're able to detect sound around you, but understanding isn't as clear as you would like. The second type of hearing loss, and the main focus of this presentation, is going to be sensorineural hearing loss. Sensorineural hearing loss is categorized as damage to the inner ear or problems with the nerve pathways from your inner ear to your brain. These losses are permanent, as it's damage to the physical nerve or pathway that delivers the electrical sound signal to the brain. There's no physical obstruction, rather irreversible damage. With this type of hearing loss, patients commonly describe soft sounds as being hard to hear, or even louder sounds being unclear or muffled. This type of hearing loss can be caused by illness, family history, genetics, aging, head trauma, exposure to ototoxins, and vascular damage. When considering smoking and hearing implications, when considering smoking and hearing implications, we're most commonly concerned with the development or progression of this type of hearing loss due to prolonged exposure to toxic chemicals and vascular damage. Being as this hearing loss is permanent, there's no medical or surgical treatment options to restore initial function. However, hearing aids and other assistive listening devices have been proven effective in offering access to auditory input. So in 1985, the global prevalence of sensorineural hearing loss was reported on by the World Health Organization. At that time, 42 million people were estimated to have a disabling degree of hearing loss. Since then, prevalence of hearing impairments has grown exponentially, with the most recent World Health Organization data showing approximately 466 million people currently have some level of disabling loss. And it's predicted that the prevalence will increase to 630 million by 2030 and over 900 million by 2050. Currently, in the US alone, 15% of the adult population, or about 40 million adults over the age of 18, report having some degree of disabling hearing loss. So in the US alone today, the prevalence of hearing loss is equivalent to that of the 1985 global prevalence. So how do we know if someone has hearing loss? The audiogram is a chart that shows us the results of a hearing test. It shows how well you hear sounds in terms of frequency and intensity or loudness. The audiogram shows results for each ear independently and tells the audiologist the softest sound you can hear at each specific frequency. The softest sound you can hear is also known as your threshold. So frequency or pitch range from low to high pitch and read from left to right on the audiogram. Each vertical line represents a different frequency. So we range from 250 hertz all the way through 8,000. Intensity relates to how loud or soft a sound is. Each horizontal line represents a different intensity level. The softest sounds are at the top of the chart and the loudest sounds are at the bottom. Each mark on your audiogram will show you the softest sound you can hear or your threshold. As you travel down the audiogram, volume or intensity increases, and when marking thresholds, the increase in threshold correlates with increasing severities of hearing loss. So we start in the normal range and we progress through to profound. As we progress down the audiogram, you'll see on this chart here, the different colors correlate with those different sections. So as I mentioned, a hearing test allows us to investigate how well each individual ear is hearing. When we're marking thresholds, anything that's volume is greater than your threshold or closer to the bottom of the audiogram, you'll be able to hear. So what does this mean? Let's say a hearing test has these average responses as graphed by that blue line. These thresholds are considered to be within a normal volume, falling in the gray and white area on the audiogram. With a hearing test, these thresholds are most important because you'll be able to hear the sounds needed to recognize and understand speech. When we apply something known as our speech banana, or this bubble with all those letters in it, those are all the important speech sounds we need to understand speech. So with these thresholds, because the speech banana is falling below them, you're able to understand everything, but you'll also be able to participate in whispering. You can identify a vacuum, the phone ringing, a dog barking, etc. When we're looking at someone whose hearing isn't as pristine and their thresholds drop a bit further down on the audiogram, that's when we're starting to see some hearing loss. So in this case, these thresholds would represent a mild to moderate hearing loss. And when we reapply our speech sounds, we can still distinguish quite a few, but softer sounds like F and S, we start to lose and require more volume in order to identify between those two sounds. We also start to lose some of our environmental sounds like dogs barking, and the vacuum doesn't seem as loud as it previously did. And whispering becomes more of a challenge. As we know, smoking is one of the most important risk factors in increasing of non-communicable disorders, especially chronic diseases such as cancer, stroke, heart, and respiratory diseases. So in this section, we'll look at how smoking impacts the auditory system and contributes to that hearing loss that we just talked about. Research has found smoking to be a significant contributor and independent risk factor for hearing loss globally. current smokers have 15.1% higher odds of developing hearing loss than non-smokers. This research found that both current smokers and past smokers presented an elevated risk for hearing loss, and this elevated risk is shown in a dose-dependent manner. It also found that ex-smokers were not associated with increased odds of hearing loss compared to non-smokers. So if you give up smoking, you are at a decreased risk, but you're still at an elevated risk. A 2021 longitudinal study revealed that over a 5-year period, there was a significant increase in self-reported hearing loss across participants, meaning over a 5-year period of smoking cigarettes, hearing thresholds dropped significantly enough that changes were perceived across patient population. The risk of hearing loss was found to correlate with the number of cigarettes or packs per year and the duration of smoking habits or passive smoking. These self-reports were correlated with subjective and objective audiologic measures. And it should also be noted that both current smokers and past smokers are at this elevated risk for hearing loss. Smoking and passive smoking was associated with increased odds of hearing loss, again, all in that dose-dependent manner. So research revealed that smoking causes some level of damage to the auditory system, but how does it damage the ear? It has been studied that smoking increases blood viscosity or the density stiffness of blood. Increased viscosity results in decreased oxygen flow, resulting in vascular disruptions. And as previously stated, the inner ear is highly vascularized and incredibly susceptible to these disturbances. When the cochlea is deprived of oxygen and faced with increased oxidative stress, the structures within the inner ear become structurally damaged and impede upon sound delivery to the brain. These vascular disruptions cause damage to the susceptible hair cells in the inner ear. So as mentioned, when the fluid in your ear moves, it bends these hair cells. So this top picture here shows how healthy hair cells appear in the ear. They're uniform and functional. It also should be noticed that this picture is incredibly enlarged and these hair cells are incredibly microscopic. This bottom photo shows the physiologic damage and dysfunction that occurs in these hair cells when repeatedly faced with toxins and vascular disturbances. These anatomical disturbances can be recorded and expressed in an objective audiologic measure known as otoacoustic emissions, which shows that smoking has destructive effects on hearing. Otoacoustic emissions, or OAEs, is a source of information for determining cochlear response to sound stimuli and recording changes in those responses of the auditory system in the presence of diseases or disturbance. OAEs essentially measure how intact the hair cells pictured here are. A 2015 study by Abadi et al. Found current and passive smokers had significant reduction in OAE responses when compared to non-smokers. Clinically, reduced OAEs are related to poor auditory thresholds and hearing loss. So this study continued to find reduced OAEs correlated with poor auditory thresholds in the smoking group. I have mentioned a few times now that smoking and hearing loss have a dose-dependent relationship. So like other harmful exposures, such as noise or ototoxic materials, as you increase exposure in both frequency and longevity, we will see a significantly stronger impact on the auditory system. Dosage in relating to smoking is looked at by packs per year. Increased frequency or exposure to tobacco leads to elevated risk of physiologic harm at the level of the inner ear due to vascular disturbances. As previously stated as well, age itself is a risk factor for hearing loss. Age-related hearing loss usually begins in the 3rd decade of life and progresses gradually and typically involves those hearing thresholds at the high frequencies. Smoking pack years and aging have multiplicative effects on development of hearing impairments. The incidence of hearing impairment increases with age regardless of smoking habits. However, it has been identified in the same age group, current smokers significantly increase the rate of hearing impairment. When looking at implications of smoking on hearing by age, cigarette smoking was associated with speech-relevant hearing impairment in the age groups of 40s, 50s, and 60s. The graph here shows the prevalence of speech-relevant hearing loss according to smoking status in the age category of 60 to 69, and this age category has the most significant difference in prevalence across the groups. This may be due to prolonged longevity participating in smoking, compounded with the effects of aging and the established dose-dependent relationship. So what does this mean? Let's look again at the hearing test. When we look at the average thresholds of a non-smoker in the 60 to 69 age range, they align with an average of about 26 decibels, teetering on the age of normal or falling just outside. This range would be considered normal given age-related hearing loss. When we plot the average score of current smokers in the same age range, they score about 33 decibels. That is a 7 decibel difference between groups and falls significantly outside the range of normal. So these individuals in an age range that is already susceptible to hearing loss puts themselves at a further disadvantage when compared to non-smokers. When we reapply the speech banana, we see the current smoking group starts missing out on critical speech sounds that helps us distinguish words like sit or hit. These are further examples of speech frequency shifts that exist between smokers and non-smokers at varying ages. With the younger demographic, the 5 decibel difference between groups both fall within the range of normal, but demonstrates how consistent smoking contributes to a more rapid decline in hearing status. Secondhand smoke. Significant secondhand smoke exposure increases the risk for hearing loss, all in a dose-dependent manner yet again. Non-smokers who were exposed to tobacco smoke were more likely to have hearing loss than non-smokers with no exposure. Increasing odds of hearing loss with increasing amounts of passive exposure to tobacco smoke were again consistent with the dose-dependent effect. So what are some ways that we can manage hearing loss? The first would be avoiding direct and secondary exposure to cigarette smoking. Annual hearing tests to monitor hearing status. And if a change in hearing is detected, consulting a doctor and scheduling a hearing test. Diagnosed hearing losses can be treated and managed through the use of hearing aids or other assistive listening devices. I'm now going to turn it over to Corsi to talk about tinnitus.
Hello, everyone. Now we're going to talk about tinnitus, or you might have heard of it as referred to as tinnitus. Tinnitus can also be a symptom or seen in combination with hearing loss. So for the purpose of this section, we're just going to be talking about tinnitus in the absence of hearing loss. Okay, so you might have heard that noise. That is an example of what tinnitus can be. You might have heard that after you've been exposed to loud music or any other loud sound source. But for most people, it goes away, but sometimes it does not. So, what is tinnitus? Tinnitus is defined as the perception of sound in the absence of an acoustic sound source. It can affect the quality of life by causing sleeping problems, depression, social withdrawal, work incapacity, suicidal thoughts, and cognitive impairment. Tinnitus can be constant or it can be intermittent, which means it comes and goes. So when it only exposed to risk factors for short periods of times, it usually goes away. However, after repeated exposure, the tinnitus can become permanent and debilitating. 68.5% of the population experienced tinnitus at least once during a lifetime. In a single year, tinnitus was experienced by approximately 35 to 50 million adults in the US. About 25 million Americans experienced tinnitus lasting at least 5 minutes. 12 million Americans sought medical care for tinnitus. And 2 to 3 million Americans reported symptoms that were severely debilitating. So who is at higher risk for tinnitus? These are some population groups that are more at risk. So those who smoke cigarettes, non-Hispanic whites, adults with noise exposure, adults with generalized anxiety disorder, older adults, those with hearing loss, and adults with hypertension. But for the sake of today's presentation, we're going to be focusing mostly on those who smoke cigarettes. Evidence shows there's a positive link between smoking and tinnitus, even in the absence of hearing loss. One of those theories is that smoking can cause cardiovascular morbidity, and cardiovascular morbidity is correlated to the development of tinnitus with anxiety and depressive disorders. And another theory is that smokers in general are more likely to be exposed to occupational and recreational noise without the use of hearing protection. And then both noise exposure and smoking are risk factors for tinnitus. Therefore, this increases their odds. So you may be more predisposed to smoking when working in construction or factories, hanging out at concerts, in casinos, in bars, and being in the military. So both current and former smokers had higher odds of experiencing tinnitus compared with never smokers. And you might predict that the risk for tinnitus is higher in current smokers than it is for former smokers. However, the risk of former smokers is almost identical to the risk of current smokers. Now we're going to talk about tinnitus in teens for a minute. So this is teens from ages 12 to 18 years old. Tinnitus is not as common among teens as it is adults. There are generally no objective measures of tinnitus, and objective measures are measurements that are independent of human subjective biases. So these are tests when we aren't relying on the patient's report of data. Therefore, we typically have to rely on a patient's report to collect data on tinnitus. So research has found that testing urine continine levels in all adolescents with complaints of tinnitus could help narrow down the root of the problem quicker. This test measures the amount of continine in your urine, and continine is a chemical your body makes after you are exposed to nicotine. And measuring continine is better than measuring nicotine because nicotine disappears from your system within a few hours, but continine remains for a day or more. So due to fear of judgment, punishment, and disappointment, teenagers are not always forthcoming about private information such as smoking status. So that's why this could be a good solution to help narrow down why tinnitus is happening in teens. So this is just a little explanation of how urine continine test results help us narrow down to tinnitus. So you could take a urinalysis plus a blood test, and that leads to a significant correlation between tinnitus and red blood cell count, alkaline phosphatase levels, and urine continine. So it's a good choice when trying to narrow down tinnitus in teens. Now I'm going to hand it over to Andy to talk about balance.
All right. Hey, y'all. We're going to start with balance. So I'll kind of give you a rundown of the balance system. So balance should be viewed as a three-legged stool. The first leg would be our vision, so being able to have visual input sent to the brain. The second leg would be our somatosensory, which is just the feeling of our feet on the ground. And of course, the last leg is vestibular, which is part of the inner ear. It has a sensory system in place to give our brain information about motion, head position, and spatial positions. It also helps us keep our balance, stabilize our head and body, and maintain posture. So the vestibular system is housed in the semicircular canals, which is shown in the black box. The system is filled with fluid. When there's angular movement, the fluid moves through the canals and into an extension of the canals called the ampulla, which contains hair cells. When the fluid displaces the hair cells, it then sends signals to the brain about said movement. To detect linear movement, there are two organs called the saccule, which detects vertical movement, and the utricle, which detects horizontal movement. These structures are between the semicircular canals and the cochlea. Movement is detected due to displacement of the otoconia, which are what some people refer to as crystals in the ear. All of these components are crucial to the balance system. So now that we know about the different components of the balance system, we should understand the prevalence of balance issues. There are many factors that affect dizziness and balance, and its prevalence is significant in the adult population. So big picture, 1 in 7 adults experience dizziness at some point in their lives. And not only that, but approximately 25% of adults struggle with balance issues, not just dizziness, in their lifetime. This again could be from multiple factors like age, neuropathy, vestibular issues, or vision issues. But for this presentation, we're going to focus on how smoking affects the 1 in 7 and the 25%. All right. So overall, studies show that the equilibrium of smokers is more unstable than non-smokers. In research, there are a few theories on why smoking could affect balance. The first would be an impaired dilation of the circulatory system, which we kind of talked about before. Smoking affects the blood vessels and makes them more susceptible to damage. This could reduce the blood flow to the inner ear, which can deteriorate the vestibular system's ability to detect linear and angular acceleration. The second theory would be smoking decreases muscle tone, specifically deep tendon reflexes and gamma efferent activity, which is just the ability to send signals from the brain to other systems such as the vestibular system. The last theory is smoking can worsen postural stability. The research did note that this theory was not affected by any factors except aging. So noise exposure or things like that did not play a role in the decline of postural stability when this was being tested. Now, getting into dose-dependent effect, in a study done by Wada et al., it examined if the amount one smokes affects their postural stability. There were 3 groups: chronic smoking, which was described as smoking more than or equal to 30 packs a year; moderate smoking, which was described as smoking less than 30 packs a year; and then non-smokers. The graph shows the incidence of new peripheral vestibular events of the participating individuals over a certain time frame with chronic, moderate, and non-smokers. The line for chronic smokers is the bold black line at the top, and it shows a significant correlation between smoking and new peripheral vestibular events. More factors pointed out in the study include males that smoked more than 30 packs a year had a stronger correlation with new peripheral vestibular events. It also discussed the peripheral vestibular event incident among females was 2 times higher than males. This could be due to gender disparities stemming from osteoporosis, BPPV, which is the crystals in the ear, which I talked about earlier, and peripheral vestibular events just being more common in females than males. Okay, so as we've discussed, smoking has an isolated correlation with balance issues, and this is prevalent because there are so many other factors that can affect balance. Like we discussed, the dosage, age, and even in some cases, gender. But what happens if someone quits smoking? Well, in Hung et al. Study, it showed that those who quit smoking could restore flexibility and static balance performance in older adults. In past studies, the researchers put the elderly in exercise programs, and it showed that current smokers improved less on self-reported balance and mobility. So the last point was found in Schmidt et al. Study and was consistent with the results from past studies, which is the increase on the measures of static postural stability during abstinence of smoking was less pronounced. So simply put, those who stop smoking have the ability to restore flexibility and static balance, but the improvement is not as pronounced in chronic smokers. So another concept I'd like to touch on is how the vestibular system is affected by secondhand smoke. In one study, the neuromotor function was measured in children who with secondhand smoke exposure. There were 404 kids aging 7 to 9 years old who were exposed to secondhand smoke and other neurotoxins in their environment. The children's serum cotinine levels were measured to determine the secondhand smoke exposure. About 50% of the children were exposed to secondhand smoke based on this measure. And it was concluded that secondhand smoke exposure was significantly associated not only with balance, but the visual motor coordination, which is just hand-eye coordination. It also affected fine motor integration and strength. It was also found that children whose mothers smoked during pregnancy had lower scores on balance and fine motor coordination compared to mothers who did not smoke. There was a significance between the number of cigarettes smoked during pregnancy and the children's score on the balance and fine motor coordination performance. Overall, secondhand smoke exposure can be or may be associated with childhood neuromotor deficits. So, not just for comparison's sake, researchers compared scores of smokers and those who drink alcohol. In this study, there were 4 groups: people who do not smoke and do not drink, those who only smoke, those who only drink, and those who smoke and drink. They were compared using the Romberg eyes closed test, which is just when a patient stands with their feet together, arms crossed across their chest, and they need to maintain this posture with their eyes closed for about 30 seconds without swaying or falling. This study showed that the smoker and drinker group did the worst. The group that only drank and the group that only smoked did essentially the same, and the non-smoker and non-drinker group did the best. So essentially, it shows that drinking and smoking have similar effects to the balance system. Just some other factors I wanted to note include anxiety and depression. These 2 issues are significant on their own, but experiencing anxiety and depression due to balance issues can significantly change one's lifestyle. It could affect their social interactions and everyday activities. This graph shows that significantly more adults experience anxiety and depression associated with their balance problems, and the prevalence increases as the years go by. Another is fall risk, which is prevalent to the advanced age population. So going back to Hung et al. Study, he talked about the different components of health like static and dynamic balance, flexibility, muscle endurance, speed, and agility being affected by smoking. But what does this all mean in real-world scenarios? Every factor discussed affects an individual's way of living and thus can negatively affect their independence. A factor heavily discussed is fall risk. In Hung et al. Study, it showed that older adults who smoked may attenuate or have a decrease of speed, agility, and static and dynamic balance performance, thereby increasing the risk of a fall. In the long run, this could lead to a loss of independence. This combined with the anxiety and depression associated with balance issues can actually create worsened outcomes for individuals. So that was all for balance. Now we're going to go into overall takeaways with Core C.
All right, so some takeaways from all this. Most importantly, it is never too late to quit smoking. And while some audiological issues are not reversible, they are very manageable. So audiologists, in collaboration with ear, nose, and throat doctors, behavioral therapists, physical therapists, and many other professions can help manage your hearing tinnitus and balance issues. So if you or someone you know is suffering from hearing loss, tinnitus, or balance issues, please contact and schedule an appointment with an audiologist. And for more information on audiology and how to get help from an audiologist and to find audiologists in your area, you can scan this QR code from the American Academy of Audiology. I just wanted to point out that it is important to note that this is a relatively new concept that is being researched, and we are hopeful that in the future, more studies will come out about the effects of vaping and other forms of smoking, as well as more information about secondhand smoke exposure. And then if you want more information and education and resources on the effects of tobacco and how to quit, you can scan this QR code or visit the Tobacco-Free Living website. And then lastly, if we are so grateful to those of you who are willing to participate in our survey. So if you filled out the first one, please scan this QR code to complete this post-presentation survey. And we're going to leave this one up while we answer any questions. So you can scan it whenever you get a chance. And now I will open the floor to anyone who has questions.
We have thank y'all for sharing that. I think it's really interesting and challenges us to think, especially for healthcare providers, challenges us to think about complex health behavior. I'm excited to see more research come out from it to see how we can help folks who've been smoking for long term quit, and then also like help be able to like restore the balance system and like figure out how to connect them to hearing resources. We have 3 questions. 1, 2 are complex. So the first one is, the focus of the research is obviously focused on individuals with a normal baseline. Are the results the same for individuals that already have hearing loss causes?
Do you guys want to take that or you want me to respond?
I can try. You can
Go for it, Kelly. I like it.
carry it over the finish line. Most of this, as noticed, most of this research is focused on individuals who have a normal baseline. A lot of research, in particular regarding individuals with hearing loss, have not been examined and studied. With individuals who have pre-existing hearing loss, you have to consider the etiology of the hearing loss that's existing and also other factors that contribute to the loss that they have. Our hope is that further research on this topic and in this field, as mentioned by Corsi, looking at vaping and secondhand smoke exposure continues, but also perhaps further investigation as to how smoking can contribute to furthering damaging already existing hearing loss. With the research that's presented, it could be assumed that smoking and vaping in conjunction with a already established hearing loss can, in a dose-dependent manner, worsen the effects of the hearing loss and the tinnitus and the balance.
Well said.
There's a question in the chat, and Dr. Mashway, I'm gonna give it to you. It says,
Okay.
where would the best place to find more research be?
On this topic? So, and I think it kind of depends on where you're coming from and what your background is. I mean, the best of the best is going to be scholarly literature that you can find through Google Scholar, which is a really, really great access point. But there are lots of resources like the TFL website that don't maybe necessarily specifically talk about hearing, but they can speak to the effects of smoking in general. So I think it kind of depends on what you're looking for and how in depth you want to go. But there's a lot of good information through Google Scholar. And of course, we as, professional resources would be happy to answer any questions or have offline discussions to discuss this further anytime. Feel free to reach out to us.
We have thank y'all for those answers already. Y'all are very smart, and it's incredible to be able to highlight y'all and the work y'all have done. It's super, I'm very proud. We have one more question from our Q&A section. See some chats coming through. I really encourage folks to, if you have any other questions, please You can ask them now, there's plenty of time, or also you can like reach out to us and we'll connect you to these folks. Someone followed up and said, thanks, and sorry for being vague. I was asking more about any specific journals you could recommend regarding audiology research.
Yeah, that's a great question, but it's a tricky one to answer because, the audiology journals, the big ones are the American Journal of Audiology and then JAAA, which is the Journal of the American Academy of Audiology. And those are great resources. However, I'm going to be honest, when we did our search, a lot of the literature was in public health journals or, things that where we wouldn't expect to find them. So, yes, the audiology journals are a great place to start. But the public health literature is also really helpful. So for audiology, it's JAAA and AJA. So the Journal of the American Academy of Audiology or the American Journal of Audiology. And then I think there's one other question I see here in the Q&A list. I'll just read it out loud for
Go for it.
everyone's reference. Also, as a hard of hearing individual, you represent the hearing chart as a flat line. As you know, that is not the reality of hearing loss, which can occur differentially across different frequencies. Does smoking cause loss in different frequencies, such as the speech range, more than other frequencies, or is it a consistent across the entire hearing range?
So for the sake of the presentation, we graphed it as a flat line, just due to looking at averages between 3 scores between the 500, 1,000, and 2,000 hertz range. So we average those scores together and just put that flat line. Most hearing losses, as mentioned, are not going to come across as a flat line. In most of the research found, a lot of the frequencies affected by smoking are those speech-related frequencies. So those sensitive speech frequencies are going to be a little bit more higher in nature. So we tend to see sloping hearing losses, that you can detect those lower frequency sounds, but in the higher frequencies, they kind of drop off. For this presentation, we just found it would be easier to demonstrate a flat line to get the point across. But yes, we'll see a decline in the high frequencies first that can slowly gradually shift into those lower frequencies as well with increased exposure.
And I just wanted to add to that, going back to what I said, a lot of people that have tinnitus or hearing loss also are seen in combination with noise exposure. They're at a higher risk. So a lot of times the frequencies where we see noise exposure, which Kelly said is in those speech frequencies, are also sometimes more affected because of that in combination with the smoking.
Great answers, guys. And I just want to piggyback on this to add in general with everything that we're discussing today. We're specifically looking at the impacts and clinically what it causes, what it shows in terms of hearing loss and tinnitus or ringing in the ears, and also the effect on the balance system. I think it's also important to keep in mind that it's not just these separate clinical pathologies or problems that arise. You really also have to think about person-centered care and the impact on quality of life. We know that hearing loss, tinnitus, and balance disorder are all associated with withdrawal and depression, a reduction in activities of daily living. People don't do what they used to love doing anymore if they can't communicate and or stand up well or tolerate the ringing in their ears. So the bigger picture is that this can really have a big negative impact on one's quality of life. Maybe the individual doesn't think about it in terms of, oh, my hearing's not that bad, or I have a little bit of a hearing loss, but it doesn't bother me so much, so I'm going to keep smoking. Well, now we know that can continue to deteriorate those thresholds, and then it can end up becoming a bigger problem.
I am just going to click through real quick to our references if anyone was interested in following up with any of those.
Dr. Maggio, I really appreciate that like kind of connection for everybody. I think especially for folks who are like myself, I'm not a direct public health support person. So to get that kind of message across from, providers like y'all of like, yeah, this is an issue with smoking and hearing, but also it's like a larger, person-centered care issue. And I think reminding folks of like what the person-centered reason behind it is always like, it's always very important and really important. And, hopeful that like kind of the bridge. So the way this all started, folks, is like Dr. Maja got connected to us through a peer of mine, Bradley Wellens, of like trying to talk about equity and better patient care. And then I was like, Dr. Maja, can we see and affects hearing and learn more about that as an educational piece for me and for my team. And it's been really well. It's been brilliant, and I learned a lot. Hope folks learned a lot today. We'll have a recording so you can share with other folks like within the field or with people who couldn't make it. I know 9 o'clock is like tough on a Thursday, but we want to encourage people to share this information because I think it can be really impactful, especially there are some casinos that are still you're allowed smoking within casinos. Some bars are not totally smoke free. And when we think about compounding effects of health and healthcare on a person and quality of life and long-term care, that having smoke-free areas and smoke-free workplaces can be really impactful. So speaking of, future ways you can learn more about like the work we do and how we combine not just smoking, but smoking with compounding effects and other healthcare issues, is I shared a flyer of our future Empowering People and Community series in the chat. Please feel free to download that and share with your friends and other coworkers. If you go to this link, you can see all of that on a website and then also sign up for future sessions. They're all free. They're all in various times. They're usually all on a Thursday. And then if you miss it, there's a recording that gets sent out. But it's a really great series that highlights a partnership between us as tobacco and vaping cessation like experts with other folks like these folks today who are experts in their field. And it's always really cool to be able to share that information and highlight those folks who are doing the work in different areas. Are there any other last questions or anything? Corsi, Kelly, Andy, thank you all for being here today. Dr. Maja, thank y'all. Anything else y'all wanted to say before we close out?
Thank you guys, and thank you James and Michelle and everybody at Tobacco Free Living for helping us organize and put all this together.
Yeah, just thanks for the collaboration. We've enjoyed it. We may not be done here. We are certainly going to try to move forward and continue to educate more audiologists and hearing healthcare professionals about this topic as well, so that they can educate their patients.
Thanks again. Y'all did all the hard work, and everybody have a great Thursday. We hope to see you on future events. Appreciate y'all.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.